there is a misconception that in Argentina we killed all Black people. But I think it's important to understand what really happened.
During this year's FIFA World Cup, Black American actor Samuel L. Jackson set social media ablaze when he called Argentina one of the most racist countries in the world. His declaration sparked a fiery debate and uncovered a truth that many people didn't know. Argentina actually has Black citizens. Yes, you heard that right. The South American country, known for its strong European influence, actually has a deep African heritage. In fact, at one point, people of African descent made up a significant portion of Buenos Aires. So, why is Argentina's Black population seemingly invisible to the rest of the world today? That's what led us to Julia Cohen Ribeiro, an Afro-Argentine activist, artist, and Afro-tourism director who has made it her life's work to bring Argentina's overlooked Black history and present-day Black community back into view.
So Argentina had 2 million people that were Indigenous, Black, and Spanish. And we received 6 million immigrants from Europe, mostly white.
In this episode, Julia uncovers the truth about Argentina's African heritage and gives her candid take on questions that have been swirling online for the past 2 months. Like, were Afro-Argentines intentionally eliminated from the country's population? And was Samuel L. Jackson actually right? Let's get into it on this episode of Black and Borderless. Welcome to Black and Borderless, Julia. I'm so excited about having you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. It's great to have you. I'm super excited about this. I actually think you may be our first guest from, no, I don't think, I know you're our first guest from South America. No pressure. You're representing the whole continent.
I hope I do good.
You will. You will. I'm sure you'll do awesome. Let's talk about the drink that you're drinking. Tell us the name, and you say it's an indigenous drink that people consume daily.
Yes.
In Argentina. Can you tell us about the drink?
Of course. It's called Maté, M-A-T-E, and is originally a Guarani drink. Guarani is one of the indigenous people from this region, also in the south of Brazil and in Paraguay, Uruguay. The Guaranis were one of the main indigenous people. Uruguay and Paraguay are two Guarani words. Okay. And the Guaranis, they planted mate trees above their burial grounds. Okay. And they were nomad people. So coming back to these places where they planted the mate trees and then drinking the mate from the leaves of those trees was a way to connect with their ancestors, right? So what we do is that we put the herbs, the mate herbs, into a cup that originally was a dried gourd. Okay, it was a gourd that was cut and that became a cup. We still have those kinds of cups that come from the gourds, but nowadays we have all kinds of mate. This one was made by an artisan. And we put the herbs here. And then we put this that is kind of a metal straw that has a filter on the bottom so the leaves don't get inside the straw. And we have our thermos with hot water and we pour the water here and we drink it. And we usually drink it in groups. It's a communal drink. So we all drink from the same cup, and there is one person that is in charge of pouring the water and giving the cup to the other people. So yeah, it's something that we drink in groups and we offer to anyone that wants a mate. Like one day I was traveling in Europe and I had forgotten my mate. And as I said, I drink it every day in the morning and in the afternoon. And I was desperate pour a mate because it was 1 month and I hadn't had any mate. And I saw a girl with her mate cup, with her thermos, and I was like, can I have one? And she was like, of course. And we became friends over the mate. So it's like something that we're open to sharing with anyone. We take it to work, we take it to school. So yeah, it's something that goes with us. But it's not only in Argentina, in the south of Brazil, they also drink mate, in Uruguay and Paraguay. And in that sense, for me, it's also very important because it reminds us that we come from the Guarani people. And even though now we are separate in different countries, we are all the same people. Yeah.
By that. No, that's pretty awesome. I'm gonna have to find a place in the States where I can try some. So I'm sure there is some
Yes,
place.
I'm sure.
I'm gonna be on the lookout for that, or I'm gonna search that out, and I'll let you know. I'll
Yes, let me know,
once I
please,
do.
if you like it.
So, for many of our viewers who don't know, the reason why I really want to bring someone specifically from Argentina is because the rest of the world, especially we in North America, know Argentina as quote the most European country in South America. So imagine my surprise and shock when I found that there was a pretty significant and substantial Black community in Argentina. So I brought you on today because I want to talk about that. I was so fascinated when I found that there was I knew there were obviously Black people in Argentina, but I didn't realize kind of the extent of the history of the Black Argentine population. And when I came across a video featuring you on social media, I figured I would bring you on to really tell us what that community is all about, what the history of that community is, and kind of where you as a Black Argentine, what your experience is in current day Argentina, and where you see the community going like in the next 20 years. So I'm super excited to talk about that.
Yes, perfect. I'm excited to talk about it as well. I really dedicate my life to visibilizing Afro-Argentine culture in my job, in my activism, in my art as well. I'm also an artist. So it's not that I consciously said, I'm gonna do this, and this is gonna be one of the most important things in my life, but it just happened, and I'm very happy that I get to do this as my work. I think it's very important, and as you said, there's so much more than people expect. So there's a lot of work to do.
So, Julia, let's start off by just kind of for those who don't know, our viewers who probably like me didn't know the extensive history of Black Argentina. Few people know that in the early 1800s or thereabouts, there was a significant percentage of Argentina's population that was Black. Can you briefly explain for our viewers what happened and why the Black population is nearly invisible in Argentina today, at least to the rest of the world?
Yes. So, as any other country in the American continent, Argentina was a colony, a Spanish colony, and every colony was based on the slave trade. This European colonizers that came to our territories, they didn't come to do the hard work. So they enslaved Black and Indigenous people. And Argentina had the same history as any other country in the Americas in that sense. And in the last census of the colonial era, we have a percentage of 30% of the population of Argentina was Black, right? So it was a big part, a big portion of our population. And of course, that left a cultural legacy in the country that is very present to this day in our food, in our music, in our architecture. Um, and in very major events of our history, as for example the independence wars, the Black population had a big participation, um, and that is what we are bringing back to light with our activism and with our work in the Afro-Argentine movement. Because what happened is that, and this for me is very important because there is a misconception and a common sense that in Argentina we killed all Black people. right? Is a very common phrase. They killed them all. And Argentina as a state had the same as Brazil, as Colombia, of really of this what we call blanqueamiento here in Latin America, this widening of the population of the countries. But this was a project of the whole continent, right? Erasing in different ways the population, the Black population. For some of these ways were sending them to the front lines of the wars, of the independence wars or the wars that came after that. Also, encouraging, for example, in Latin America, we didn't have segregation as in the US, but also with a racist background, the mixing of ethnicities and races was encouraged. So there was this thing of mejorar la raza, to make the race better by mixing with white people. So the children would come out white or lighter skinned, right? So this happened here as it happened in Brazil, as it happened in Colombia, in Peru, in Bolivia, etc. But the difference in Argentina is that for in one hand, the abolition of slavery was happened before than in other countries in 1853, and also we were the second biggest country in the American continent to receive a big wave of European population. After the U.S. came Argentina, so we received 5 million of European immigrants in a moment that our country had a 2 million population. So Argentina had 2 million people that were indigenous, black, and Spanish. And we received 6 million immigrants from Europe, mostly white, right? So because we didn't have segregation, these people mixed between each other. And the result is a much lighter population than other countries. But that doesn't mean these people are not Afro-descendant. And I think it's very important. Some people don't like this term because they think, oh, you're saying Afro-descendant to say you're not black in a way. But I think in Argentina is the opposite. And I think terms gain different meanings depending on the context. And
Yeah.
for us, it's very important that maybe these people that are white, look white, live their lives as white people, they say they are Afro-descendant because it's a way of recognizing that the black people, their ancestors, existed. Because we are fighting for the recognition of the existence of Black people and their culture in our territory, right? So that's why it's important that we use this term. Even people that look like me, look like you, or may look white, right? And it's important that they bring their family pictures and show, my grandma was Black.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and that also pushes the rest of society to change. One very important thing is to change the education, to change how we teach history, right? Because when I was at school, I never received anything about Afro-Argentine history. I had to learn as an adult. And now I know there is so much, right? So many important things that I could have always known.
Yeah.
So I think that's the change we're aiming, and we're seeing it happen.
Yeah, yeah, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to kind of sit on a particular point that you talked about, which is that the general perception is that you know all the people of African descent or all the black people in Argentina were so killed off, but it wasn't quite that dramatic, or that's not really accurate. What you've described is kind of like a slow erasure of
Yes,
people of African descent, right? Whether through encouraging interracial production, or people of different races getting together to kind of whiten the population, or through war, like you said, sending black people to the front lines to go fight, which is an indirect form of killing, but in a way.
yes,
So I think that's a very interesting point. I want our viewers to really sit on that point because I have heard that many times. Like there was this kind of massacre and,
Yeah,
Black Argentines were kind of wiped off. But it was a slow kind of erasure, a systemic one, if you will. It seems like.
exactly. That
So
it's not violent, right? It's not racist, but I think it's
mhm.
important to differentiate the process and understand what really happened, as you were saying.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk about you a little bit, Julia, and how you even, your kind of journey to self-discovery and
Yeah.
your, discovery of your blackness, if we could call it that, right? So I read somewhere, and tell me if this is accurate, that you, for the, greater part of your childhood, didn't even know that you were black. You didn't even identify as black. Tell us about that. And when did you come to that realization that, oh, actually, this is a part of my heritage?
Yeah. No, I always thought it as a part of my heritage. I I I was I was always conscious that my dad was black, my grandma, but we never really talked about it in my family in that sense. Um, and even though I suffered forms of racism when I was little, it was only when I had uh, other black friends that were really close that I started to realize, the importance of calling myself black. Because I needed to process certain things about, my hair, the way I look. And in that sense, it was very important to see myself as black, to look for other black people that had the same experiences. And I think, yeah, it was after I got out of high school that also maybe I received information about, maybe a broader concept of blackness, right? And I started to understand myself as black. And then I think what really, made it for me was to find black community here in Argentina. I think that was the last step, because in that way I could also not only see myself as Afro-descendant or black, but also as Afro-Argentine here.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
So growing up, did you go to predominantly white schools prior to high school? Was that where did you grow up, and what was kind of the racial makeup of where you grew up?
I was actually born in Brazil. My dad's Brazilian, my mom's Argentinian, and I moved to Argentina was when I was 10 years old, right? And Yeah, there was not a lot of black kids growing up in my school. Um, but I do remember I had a lot of issues with my hair, like going to school with my hair out, and people like laughing at my hair or other kids. That was the main thing for me when I was little. And then when I moved to Argentina, I started to experience maybe some things like people calling me black. That was also a thing, right? I was very different for the eyes of people here. And even here, I used to hear people say there are no black people in Argentina because there is still is, but there was even more ignorance, I don't know, 20 years ago, about life as in Argentina. So those were the things that also um, started to make me think about my own identity.
Yeah, so you grew up in Brazil. You were getting comments about your hair and its texture and all that. Was that mainly coming from people of color, or it was coming from non-people of color, if you remember as a kid? And what's your earliest memory of being like, "Oh, I'm different," as a kid? Do you remember that moment, the moment that you're like, "Oh, maybe I might be a little different."
Yeah, I think it was with those interactions, like on the street or feeling like people laughed at my hair, usually boys, I think. But I don't
Mhm,
remember if they were people of color or not.
mhm,
I also think the perception of blackness in Brazil has changed a lot. I think
mhm,
maybe when I was little, I was considered white in Brazil,
yeah,
uh, yeah, because I'm light skinned. And nowadays, nobody would say that. It would be very polit- politically incorrect to say I'm white, right? Because now
Mhm.
Brand New also has uh, a different perception of blackness. But it also depends where, you know, it really depends.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and, I think we're gonna talk about Brazil a little bit later on. We're kind of comparing, the Latin communities in Brazil and Argentina to kinda see what those differences are,
Yeah.
between communities. So, how did you, eventually discover kind of the broader Black history of Argentina? So now you're a kid, you're living in Argentina, you're aware of your Blackness. Do you remember the kind of the instance or the events that lets you going, "Oh, there's a whole history behind this?"
Yes, there is one event that is one of the main moments of my life. That is actually, I was a little bit older. It was in 2016, right? And Argentina has a very big and powerful feminist movement. And for 40 years, there is an event that happens every year that is the National Women's Gathering. Nowadays, it's plurinational women's, lesbian, travesti, trans, non-binary
Broad.
gathering. Yes. But it's, yes, the National Women's Gathering, and it's been happening for 40 years now. It happens in a different city of the country each year, and thousands of people travel to that city to spend one weekend going to different spaces that we call workshops to talk about all kinds of subjects. So we could have the women's and health workshop, women's and politics workshop, women's and economy workshops. And 2016 was the first year that this event had an Afro-descendant women's workshop. So I went there. I was part of a feminist organization. I went with all my partners, my comrades, and I went alone to the Afro-descendant women's workshop, and it was a room full of Black women, Black people. And what happens in this workshop is that everybody can have the microphone and talk, and there is one person that writes everything down, and from each workshop, we create a document, right? And I remember I talked, and there was a Venezuelan partner that drew me with something I said, and she came talk to me after, and we started to connect, right? And I saw, this historical Afro-Argentines activists. That was when I knew the people that had been fighting for these spaces, this kind of spaces, the kind of policies for a long time. And when I came back to Buenos Aires, I met with other people that I knew there, and we met all people that were artists, right? Those started to connect to do some kind of black art here. And actually, we created a collective that I'm still part of today. That is called Kukily Afro-Feminist Arts Collective. We are four women that we were all living here in Buenos Aires at that time. And I started working with them and creating, art about how it was to be Black in Buenos Aires. But it was through these other women that I met that I started to hear about, for example, Maria Remedios del Valle. That was this Black woman that was a captain in the independence wars, and that is considered the mother of the nation. She's the main figure of Afro-Argentine history. It was really through other women that I started to get information, the information that I didn't get in school, right?
Mhm.
And then after I started doing research by myself. But for me, it was very important that it was in this collective environment collective political environment that I started to be involved in all of this. and that is where I got my first education about it.
Wow. And at what age were you at that point? Like
It
at
was 20.
so at
It was
20 years old is when you kind of have your first full
yes,
encounter with, your African or like your Afro-descendant history, which is remarkable. I think, for someone like me being in the States, yes, the US education system isn't perfect, but I think what I can say, and maybe what we take for granted, is that very early on, we're kind of immersed in Black history, right? We have
yes,
a Black History Month here. By the time you're in fourth grade, which is like 9 or 10, you kind of, even my daughter, who's 8 years old, already knows Martin Luther King and kind of knows what the contributions are of Martin Luther King. So it's remarkable for me to hear someone that kind of their first full encounter with their, Afro history is at 20. That's pretty remarkable and pretty shocking. So what was your sentiment at that time, right? Kind of opening this new world of Black history, Black Argentine history to you. What were your thoughts about the fact that you were just now finding out about that? What emotion best describes what you felt at that time?
I was just like open to everything. Like I was like so excited to be part of the movement, to create a collective. I never really thought like, what am I doing? I was just like flowing with it. I
Mhm.
now I think it was something that I really really needed. Trusting the people I was getting to know. I was very happy. I was very happy. I was I still admire so much the people that I met there, the older Afro-Argentine women that I met, they are still part of my life. They are kind of mentors for us, and I felt reflected. I think that's the word. I felt reflected.
In a way here, I think sometimes we use the term "seen." I think that's another way of, like, say, to feel
Yeah,
seen here is another way. I know, like, kind of that term has been bastardized 'cause now people use it for everything, but initially it meant the sense of being able to see yourself in other
yeah.
people and feeling validated because now you feel like your full self is being acknowledged or being seen. So that thank you for walking us through that journey because I'm always interested in how, someone gets to this point where they're like, okay, I'm going to champion this cause. Like what kind of is a journey? And you've laid that out for us, I think pretty beautifully. So today, if I asked you, Julia, who is Julia Cohen Ribeiro? How would you describe your identity?
I have a very diverse identity. So I feel like I cannot escape from doing something with it. I'm an Afro-Argentine woman. I'm an Afro-Jewish woman. And I'm a queer woman. So I think those are the three identities that shape my life, shape who I am, that in a way put me in the position to fight for my rights, for the rights of um, my collectives, and I love it really. I'm like I wouldn't be anything else.
And how much has kind of uncovering your history, whether that be your Afro history or, you know, queer history in Argentina, whatever aspect of your identity, has that have you always kind of had this confidence in owning who you are, or what was a turning point for you? I guess I would say, in kind of saying, I am these things, and I love that I was born being these things.
No, I think it was a construction uh, through while I was growing up, um, and really finding spaces to live my identities in a collective. I think that's the main thing. I don't
Mhm,
think I'm by myself with it. I think I share it with other people. Uh, I think there's space for me to change things or to try to change things with others. Like for me, the collective part of living an identity is key,
mhm,
because as we were saying, feeling seen is so important.
mhm,
So having the Afro-Argentine community that is part of my life every day in some way, you know, seeing them, seeing other collectives do things, other organizations do things, seeing the people that create other spaces for our community, like pushes me to do more as well.
Mhm.
And people that also believe that we have to do it here in Argentina. So that's for me, I think, is what you know makes it all make sense.
So now I'm going to get you out of the hot seat because I made you do a ton of self reflection, right? I feel like it's becoming like a therapy session. Therapy session at this point. I'm like, make you get into your feelings. Like, tell me, okay. So let's switch gears. I want to talk about now what you're doing
Yeah,
to ensure that other people of color in Argentina are being feeling seen, and that the history that we just talked about is being seen and being known across the world. So you have two initiatives that serve that, or that are towards achieving that, right? One is you have Lunfarda Travels, which is a touring company that really basically takes people on this kind of Black um, Argentine tour. And then you also have El Tambo Afro, which is this collective that you founded. Can you tell us about those two initiatives briefly, what they are and why you decided to start each one of them?
of course. There are actually three initiatives because I work in Lunfarda as the Afro-tourism director, developing, the Black Argentine History Tour and also other Afro-center experiences. And then through the Afro-tourism project, we open El Tambo Afro, which is the first Black artists and entrepreneurs tour in Argentina. And then I'm part of Kukily, that is the arts collective, that we also do a lot of community work here in Buenos Aires. So, well, the first collective I was part of was Kukily, and we do um, mostly performance arts, but we do it in a way that we can bring people from the community to be part of the performances. So you don't have to be an artist, but you create art, Black Center art. And for us, that is very important that our performances, our work are mostly um, communal, right? And we bring people in to the works, to the art space, right? And we also create spaces for Black artists in Argentina. For example, last year we did a arts residency for Black artists in Argentina. So we're always trying to open up the art space for Black and Indigenous people, queer people. That is not that easy. The art world is very uh, closed in a way. And then I'm part of Lunfarda since 2020. I did the research for the Afro-Argentine Heritage Tour. And for 6 years, I've been working in Lunfarda. Now we have a team of five Afro-descendant guides, and we do tours every day in English, in Portuguese, and Spanish. And we're trying to expand the project even more. We want to bring more people to get to know the Afro-Argentine culture. We also connect tourists um, to things that the community has or does. For example, there's a big Cape Verdean community in Buenos Aires. So if people want, we can arrange a lunch in the Cape Verdean Community Center so they can get to know that history. Or we also work with musicians to uh, create candombe workshops. Candombe is like the main Afro-Argentine rhythm. So we're always trying to create new experiences to bring people closer to the Black culture here. And then El Tambo is the store that we opened 1.5 years ago. We have 35 projects that are all from Black entrepreneurs. Some of them are Afro-Argentines, but also Black people that live here in Argentina or that, um, you know, we bring things from other countries as well. It's a very diasporic space. It's not only a store; is a hub for Black people in Buenos Aires. It's very nice to see that some Black people they come to Buenos Aires to visit or to live, and the first connection that they have to the Black community is El Tambo, because the Black community doesn't have a lot of physical spaces in the city. So
Mhm.
for us, it's very important that people can actually you know look for us and come to the store, talk to us, get the information, get to know how to connect more with the community.
Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, you have you're wearing many hats, but all are kind of serving the same cause of bringing visibility to the Afro-Argentine community and making other Black people who come to Buenos Aires feel the sense of community. So I want to talk about Lunfarda Travels. So if I were to go on this tour, because we have lots of travelers who watch this show, what
Yes.
are like kind of two sites or two places you would take people on this tour that would I think they would find most surprising to see in Argentina?
Okay. So all the tour happens in San Telmo. San Telmo is a historic neighborhood of Buenos Aires, and it used to be called the Drums neighborhood. So it's very connected to Black history. And I think one of the things that is very interesting about Black history, and people would be surprised, is that tango, that is one of the most famous elements of Argentine culture, has Black roots, and that the first composers, musicians of the tango scene were Black Afro-Argentine people. So
Wow.
I think we see a mural of two brown tango dancers, and we talk about that history. And then I think the other thing that is interesting is also there is a church in the neighborhood that has a Black saint that was very, yeah, he was very important in Latin America. He was an Afro-Peruvian saint. And there are many churches of the historic part of the city where San Martin de Porres, this Black saint, is present.
Wow. Wow, that's remarkable. I don't even think even in the US I've come across any, account of Black saints. So I think that'd be kind of like an interesting thing to explore and to see. So this is really great work that you're doing, but I want you to share with us maybe the most rewarding part of it, or share with us a story of someone who's gone on one of these tours or who's been, a part of El Tambo Afro, who's come to one of your events, and what is like the most memorable and most rewarding response you've gotten from this work that you're doing?
I think it's like every day for us is very rewarding. I think it's very rewarding to see that, for example, the store is supporting the entrepreneurs here, and is having an economic impact in our community as well. For example, when I'm at the store and I see Black people on the street and they don't come into the store, I go look for them. And I'm like, hi. Um, when I see some Black people or Afro-descendant people on the streets, I always invite them if you want to come. And one day I did that with a woman, and she was very happy to be like called to get to know the store. And she's an Afro-Russian woman. Her dad was from Mali and her mom from Ukraine, and she's living now in San Telmo in Buenos Aires. And she's a great artist, and she became part of the store. So it's nice to see that if you know, have the courage to go and talk to other Black people, to connect in the street, sometimes you can change their lives, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so that
Yeah.
was very nice. I always tell that story, and also because she's Afro-Russian, and I love to see that we are everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, and then um, there was a man that came to the tour, and he was very happy to get to know about Afro-Argentine history. And he was very excited to know that nowadays we have a national day of the Afro-Argentines and Afro culture in Argentina. That is November 8th, which is the supposed day of the death of Maria Remedios del Valle, which is the main figure of Afro-Argentine history, as I was telling you. So nowadays that is our national day, and November has become our Black History Month, right?
Oh, wow. So that has
Yeah.
been established. As of when? When did it officially become Black History Month, and how did that even come about?
In 2013, it was all the work of the activists, decades of pushing the government to recognize the importance of Afro-Argentine history and culture, and also a political moment that was maybe better than the one we have today. That the government had a little bit more of space for diversity. So we yeah, we had that battle um, gained, and now we have this law that states that November 8th is the national day of the Afro-Argentines and Afro culture, and that also states that Afro-Argentine history has to be part of the school curriculum, right? So as you were saying that you have that right in the US, that is something that I saw happening as I was part of the Afro-Argentine movement. And nowadays, the kids have a different education than the one that I had. So
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
that is very rewarding as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can imagine. I can imagine. Yeah, I mean, when we think back, to like maybe what year is this? So let's say 60 years back in American history. I mean, I think what you guys are doing is basically what in that era, that generation of Black Americans were doing here, ensuring that African American history were integrated into the school system. And again, it's not perfect, right? I don't think we can say for sure that it's perfect, but again, just something as simple as your kindergartner or your child in second grade knowing who Martin Luther King is, I think speaks to like the progress we've made in the last 50 or 60 years.
Yeah.
And yeah, to see that that's starting in Argentina, I think, gives me at least some hope that, you know,
Yes.
movement. And that kind of brings up something else, which is okay. So in 2020, when I'm sure you're familiar with the George Floyd incident here in the US, right? The Black American that was killed by police officers here in the US. Do you recall that having any effect on the Afro-Argentine community in Argentina at that time, or even on you? And if it did have an effect, what is that? What was that effect at that time, and how has it kind of changed how the movement is being run?
Yeah, personally, of course, we as Black people, we were all affected by it. Um, I remember having like meetings with my friends to talk about it. With Kukily, we created a meditation uh, to also help people, go through hard times that we as Black people have to go through. But in a general sense in the country, I think it had an impact because people really started to talk about racism in the mainstream media, right? And I think it had an effect, at least in people that want to change and want to hear. Um, because, you know, as we also had that common sense that there was no Black people in Argentina, people were very ignorant about how racism works, right? And people are still is. But I think people started to talk about it, and there was also a conversation in mainstream media that I think was important. And we saw some institutions started to do like talks and events, and museums they started to call more Black artists. There was an impact. And I think as we're going through this moment where Argentina is again like talked about uh with the topic of racism, I think again that is actually positive for us because I think what happens here is that people don't go through the uncomfortable moment of dealing with racism and what it means and talking about it and understanding it. We have to go through that as a society. But yeah, I think George Floyd, because we were all quarantined and we couldn't look away, people were forced to talk about it.
Yeah, and kind of confront it.
Yeah,
No, that's really interesting. So we've talked about the most rewarding part of your job
yeah.
or of your work that you're doing. What has been the most challenging part of it?
The most challenging part of it is, I think, is dealing with that most of the times we don't have stability, right? And we don't have the resources of the state that we should have, you know? Um, it's always hard to explain to people why this is important. And I think maybe also comparing to the US, um, even though I know you struggle over there too, but at least to this day, there's a little bit more of recognition, a little bit more of resources. I think the money part is is hard. Not having the resource to make the festival that we want to make, or to support the spaces, or always being um, on the edge of losing what we gained. I think
Mhm.
that's very hard. But yeah, we're finding the ways to not depend so much and to build in a structure that can be more stable.
So when you say, not having the resources, are you talking specifically of resources from the state, from the government, or even from private institutions like brands or companies? Which one? Where do you feel like you're not getting the support that you should be getting or getting adequate support?
I think it's from both sides. I think we should have more support from the states because this should be like a public policy.
Mhm,
But also, from private institutions, most of them they are run by white people. So if we like wanna get something from them, it's very hard to make them understand
mhm.
or to make them want to like invest or take that risk.
And what is their main objection? So when you go into these rooms with, let's say, corporations or brands,
Yeah.
and you're saying, "Hey, we have this Black Argentine community, this Afro-Argentine community, and you guys as a brand or as a company need to, pay attention to this community or invest in it in some way." What's the main objection that you hear?
Yeah, for example, talking about tourism, right? Like we say, let's do something for November 8th. It's the National Day of the Afro-Argentine here. Let's do a post on Instagram talking up to the tourism board of Buenos Aires. Let's do a post. And they are gonna say, yeah, I get it. I get it. That is culture, that is history, but that's not tourism. And I'm like, no, we've been having this project for 6 years now. We have proven that people are interested in. We have been, it's hard for them to say maybe that person that you're talking to says, okay, but then they are gonna talk to someone else in their team or
Mhm,
in their board, and that person is not gonna understand, you
mhm,
know? So people are closed, people don't think this can really happen as something that is profitable. Uh, and or maybe they don't wanna take the risk of bringing this to other people inside their team, you know. I think that's mainly what happens is like because they are all distant from this reality,
mhm.
maybe they understand but they are not like brave enough in some way to bring this and take this risk or take make the uncomfortable conversation with someone else.
Well, why does that require bravery? Why do you think they would see it as a risk or require bravery? Because all they can say is no, right? So what about current society or the current kind of state of things in Argentina would make someone, let's say, a director of marketing right now at some corporation in Argentina feel like they're taking a risk or they have to be brave to go to the superior and say, "Hey, let's do something with this, Afro-Argentine group." Why is that a risk or considered something that requires bravery?
I think because it's still something new, is something that goes against the common sense, as we're saying, because these are not the new generations we're talking to. These are older generations that grew up with a different idea because there's so much that they have to understand. It's not something that is like purely numbers, not purely financial. Is um, they have to deconstruct a lot of what they learn,
Yeah.
and you have to take the time to do that. You have to be open to that. They have to deconstruct what they think of their own country. You know,
Mhm. Mhm.
they have to deconstruct their own idea of what Argentina is.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think that can take bravery, right? And it takes time. And I really respect the people that are going through that process because it's hard, mainly for white people, right?
Yeah.
I have many white friends here that I know that have changed the way they think because they have me, right? Or maybe they are into some kind of activism, right? Where this discourse is more common.
Mhm.
But if you are out of that kind of world, it can be kind of shocking, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that's fair. But what my observation is when you're talking about this is, and I might get some flack for saying this, but I feel like you have way more empathy and sympathy for non-black people and the process they have to go through to accept blackness than maybe some of us in the States do. Because in my head, I'm like, well, it makes sense. Why are they not accepting you? Why don't they see the value in this community? And you seem to still have a little bit of empathy for them. Like, well, they're trying, it's hard. And that's not bad or good. I'm saying it's neither, it's just my observation. It's a nuance I'm noticing maybe in the way that we in the States approach it. That's like, no,
Yeah.
you need to it's your duty as a white person to figure out how to integrate what I'm telling you into what you're doing. And you seem to kind of come from a place of empathy, I think, which is interesting to me. Um, Go
You
ahead.
know, it's not that I don't know if I have empathy or I don't have empathy. I understand, I comprehend the process.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I say you have to do the work. Yes. But when I have to comprehend what they can't, I can understand the process, you
Mhm.
know? And for me, it's the same thing with sexism. It's the same.
Mhm.
Like, yeah, men should do their work, but I get they have to deconstruct what manhood is. That's why
Mhm.
they are having a hard time.
Yeah. So basically you acknowledge the fact that it takes time, honestly. So that it's not an overnight thing. Like it's something that takes time to deconstruction of or unlearning what you've learned takes time. And you exercising patience when it comes to that. You're still persistent and you're gonna continue to push, but you understand that it's not something that's gonna happen overnight. Is that
Yeah,
accurate? Yeah.
of course. I understand somehow nothing like that happens overnight.
Yeah. Not even in a couple of years. Like you said, sometimes it's taken and it's still taking years in America. So
Yeah.
it could be decades even, maybe not even in our lifetime, who knows? But I
Yeah.
think the important thing is that it's happening and that it's things are moving in the right direction, even if we don't get to see what kind of the end place is. And maybe there is no end. Maybe this is kind of while we're all here, right? Is that every generation pushes it a little bit, further, but there really is no end because the goal of us in the universe is continue pushing forward without worrying about what the end is. Just continue moving forward. But that's like philosophy. We're gonna get into like a philosophy class now. We go into that.
Yeah.
So I want to switch great gears and talk about something that, a bit more topical that, we've been talking about. So as you know, the 2026 FIFA World Cup just took place a couple of weeks ago, and
Yeah.
Argentina was fortunate to be a finalist in the FIFA World Cup, and played the final game against Spain.
Yeah.
And that came with a lot of attention, and for Argentina, good and bad. So the good part was that, you have Messi, Argentina is one of the best teams in the world, the best football teams in the world. But also that put a spotlight on Argentina and its dynamics when it comes to like race and race relations. Really on all of South America, but Argentina because it was, a finalist. So I want to get your perspective on a few of the stories and debates that emerged during the World Cup about how race is handled in Argentina and other parts of South America. So, number one, um, Black American actor Samuel L. Jackson, during the World Cup or shortly thereafter, posted on, I believe it was Instagram or Twitter, this. Basically said, "Dear Black people, please do not cheer or root for Argentina to win the FIFA World Cup. Argentina has historically been one of, if not the most racist countries in the world." And this post by Samuel Jackson was met with kind of, I would say there were mixed reviews, right? There were people who kind of were co signing this and saying, yes, they've been to Argentina and this is true. But there was also a ton of backlash, surprisingly, from um, Afro-Argentines. I saw quite a few people saying this is not an accurate, account of our country. I'm a Black person living in Argentina, and what Samuel Jackson is saying is wrong, and how dare he say this, and he's never visited the country. So I want to get your perspective, Julia. What did you think of Samuel Jackson's post, and do you think his account of Argentina and how Black people are treated is accurate?
Yeah, the thing is, he's a very famous person, an actor, but the question is, has he read a book on Argentina history, but more specifically in Afro-Argentinian history? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's funny. And I also got very frustrated, very sad with all that was happening. But now I just think is kind of funny. The history of our countries is more complex. But I don't think he's the person to say that. That's the first thing. He's an actor, he's not a historian.
Yeah.
Uh, for us, it has a big impact that a Black person says that. I also don't think is very empathic with the Black communities, right? If he had stopped to think, oh, there is Black Argentines that are fighting for the recognition, should I say this? Like, or should I phrase it like this? But again, I think it's interesting what happened with the World Cup, but is football is not like the reality of the country. I think a lot of things got mixed up. But my conclusion is that he should stop and at least read one article
Hmm. Hmm.
because I don't think it's accurate. I don't think it's accurate. I think there is racism in every country. It takes different forms. I don't think the US is free from that. And also, I should think how people from the global north talk about the global south in any kind of way. I'm very, critical about that. And I try to be as honest as possible. Also, in this moment where the US has a government that is openly against diversity, is this the moment to say that other country is the most racist country in the world? Um, I think is not fair. It's not fair to say it to any country. I wouldn't say I would feel disrespectful if said that to any other country.
You see, that's interesting because okay, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate, right? Let me just put myself. I don't know Samuel Jackson, right? I don't obviously, right? I don't know him, but let's say I can bet, my last dollar that when he posted that, he thought he was being an advocate for Black people in Argentina. I think that's what's ironic is that you took it to be the opposite, that, "Hey, this is actually gonna hurt Black Argentines." I can bet you that when he wrote that, he thought he's maybe being the voice of, Black people in Argentina, saying, "Hey, don't support this team," because people see national football teams as, products of the governments of those countries, right? So I wonder if he was maybe isolating it was more a jab at the, government of Argentina, who then basically has produced this team of, white players, and less about taking a jab at the, you know, Afro-Argentine community, but it's interesting that it wasn't received that way because through kind of the cultural lens of the Afro-Argentine community, it was seen as, what you're saying, Samuel Jackson could hurt us more than it could help us, right? But I can probably bet you that he thought that he was actually doing, um, you know, the work of God to speak for Black people in Argentina and say, hey, don't support these guys because the way they treat Black people in their country or Black people anywhere is not the right way. So that's just my thought. What if he actually thought he was actually being an advocate for Afro-Argentines? And secondly, you mentioned that, you're very conscious about how people in the global north talk about people in the global south. But I wonder if he even made that distinction. I wonder if he even thought about himself as someone from the global north, from America. It seems like he's making a comment as just like as a Black person speaking up for other Black people and not necessarily as an American speaking for someone in the global south. What do you think of that perspective? I'm not saying that's what he was, but what if that's what he was doing?
Yeah, I feel like the result of that uh, thought is people saying, like, because I work in tourism, I got this a lot of times, like saying, uh, you know, you're the racist country, the most racist country in the world. And I'm like, stop, stop. Because if you say that, you you're stopping yourself for knowing the truth of how things happen here. And I know that common sense is like also connected to the thought of they kill them all, so there's no Black people, so there's no Black culture. So I think usually it doesn't lead to people getting wanting to to know more about Argentine culture and history and
Mhm,
present. Like
mhm,
usually it leads to people saying, I don't want to hear about Argentina at all.
mhm,
And saying Argentina is white when we drink in an indigenous drink every day, you
mhm,
know?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so that's why we felt that that was not helping because it usually leads to that, to people not wanting to know anything about Argentina.
yeah, yeah. No, I get your point, and let me know if my summary I like to kind of, like, summarize people's points to make sure that I'm hearing them. I
Yeah.
think what I'm hearing is that no matter what his intent was, right? Maybe his intent was to speak up for Black Argentines, or maybe his intent was to, fight for Black people in another part of the world. But the result was almost kind of the opposite of that, right? So it was almost kind of counterproductive. In his attempt to speak up for another Black population in another part of the world, what he did was close the world off to that Black population because now no one wants to go to Argentina and no one wants to actually find out about those Black people because they know that the country is racist and they're scared to go there. So it's almost like no matter what he intended, the way the general statement that was made did not just hurt white people in Argentina, but it would also hurt Black people because now they don't have the power to come forward and tell their stories, or they don't, for someone in the tourism industry like you, people don't want to visit now to actually hear the history of the Black community. So I think if I had you and Samuel Jackson in the room right now, um, I would like play mediator. I would say, you know, Mr. Jackson, your intent was probably to, I mean, I would hope was to empower Black people in that continent by saying that we shouldn't support the football team because they don't treat Black people well. But the effect has actually been the opposite of that. That actually people like who you are in the tourism industry feel actually closes people off. So is there a way you could have maybe added some dimension to your statement, or tap into some nuances? Yes, there's racism in Argentina. Julia has experienced racism in Argentina, and she's a Black person living there. But maybe the way you had put it could have added some dimension to to encourage curiosity about Black people and not close people off to the country entirely, so that they don't want to learn anything about it.
Exactly. I had fantasies of talking to Samuel L. Jackson after the of
So
the
okay, so I like that. So if he was in front of you today, what would you say to him? If Samuel Jackson were in front of you today and you wanted to tell him one thing in one sentence about that post
yes.
that he what would you say?
I would ask him questions. I would ask him questions. I'll say, Sam, what's your favorite thing about Afro-Argentine culture? I would say, how would you support the Afro-Argentine community? Right? What you think we should do as Black Argentines? Should we leave this country, or should we keep fighting to make the image of Argentina more diverse, or this country less racist? Like, I would like him to be put in that position.
Okay, so I completely hear you about the Samuel Jackson incident, Luya. So let's talk about another thing that happened, or another topic that was pretty prevalent during the tournament, which was the low representation um, of people of color on the actual football team, on the Argentine football team. What are your thoughts on that? When people looked around, they saw that the France's team was almost predominantly Black, and even for Spain, you have Yamin Lamal and these other players who are of African descent. Why is it that given this prevalence of people of African descent in Argentina, that the team is not very diverse?
For me, it's very obvious why this contrast happens. And the reason is that Europe is receiving the consequence of being colonizers. And that is that the African people are migrating massively to the European countries. I don't think if you went to, I don't know, Germany 20 years ago, you would see as many Black people as you see today. Um, I was in Germany 2 months ago, and yeah, and it's really nice to go and to see that there is like an African population and community, but it's of course because of the proximity and because of the connection these countries have, um, that are result of colonial ties, right? And that is something that we don't have um, here. And also, we are far away from the African continent. Um, I think that's the main reason why France, Spain, you know, a lot of European teams have more Black players. Um, we don't have Black players in our team. I'm sure we have Afro-descendant players. Maybe even if they don't recognize themselves, there was, for example, Di Maria, that is clearly Afro-descendant. But I also think it brings a discussion on how we perceive race as well, because I feel like people don't recognize indigenous traits in our teams. There are many indigenous people in the Latin American teams, but people see them as white. And as I have like the eye trained, I see the indigenous faces in our teams. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that is also something important to say. I hope that we have more, Black players in the future. I think is very important. Uh, Although we have the population, the Black population or the Afro-descendant population has an important presence um, in the Argentine culture. We don't have as many Black people in the country in present times. So I think that's why our team is like that. But most of the players come from very low class families, low class neighborhoods, and in these neighborhoods, there's a lot of indigenous people. And for me, I can see it in the eyes of Enzo Fernandez, of Lautaro Martinez, of Lisandro Martinez, El Cuti Romero. He's from Cordoba. Cordoba had a 60% of Black population, and there's a lot of Afro Cordobeses. For me, Cuti is super Afro-descendant. Like, even if they don't see themselves
Mm-hmm.
like that,
Mm-hmm.
like for me is very evident that
Mm-hmm.
that at
Mm-hmm.
least they're not white, you know?
Mm-hmm. 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 No, that's interesting. To someone who's grown up in that society, you see
Yeah.
the Afro influence in the players or the heritage in the players that maybe those of us who are not in that society don't see. I think that's a pretty interesting observation. As we kind of come towards the end of this discussion, I want to talk about kind of we know what you're doing, right? We promote visibility for Afro descendant population or the Afro descendant community in your country. Do you feel the government is doing enough to promote visibility for these communities? So you talked about how there's obviously a Black History Month that's been established now in November. Do you feel that's enough, and if not, what more do you wish they could do to support this community?
I don't think it's enough. I think there's a lot of things, spaces that as a community and with the importance that we have in the culture, we should have. Um, I think, you know, there's a lot of laws that we need. I think the government should have more incidence, more influence in the education because nowadays we have the law, it had an impact, but it really depends on the school, on the teachers, right? I think all the workers, don't matter if they're on a private sector or the public sector, they should have training on how to deal with racism, you know, how to include diversity in their workspaces. I think that is very important. I should I think we should have an anti-racism law like in Brazil. I think racism should be a crime. There are a lot of things that we could do. More visibility on, I don't know, in campaigns, for example. I think we should have a big campaign telling people how important is to recognize themselves as Afro-descendant, as indigenous. I think a lot of people still have an internalized racism where they don't wanna, you know, claim that they are Black or that they are indigenous. I think uh, there's so many things we could do. I think the indigenous part is very important when we think anti-racism as a more broad thing, and I think we could all um, get benefits from, for example, getting to learn the indigenous languages. I think when we respect that, we would also respect the Black roots as well. Um, so yeah, nowadays we have a government that don't has any interest on doing that. So we have to wait a little bit.
Yeah, I did read, how the government has kind of been pushing against what they was referred to as president, what is known as woke ideology, right? Kind of similar to what's happening in the
Yes.
U.S. with President Trump, kind of pushing against this idea of woke ideology. So, do you have to wait though? Why can't you push back against the government's resistance to um, counter the progress that you've made or that you activists have made in the Afro-Argentine community?
No, we don't wait in terms of keep, you know, doing our stuff, all open up spaces for our communities. But I do feel like in this moment, it's very hard to pass a law with with the Congress that we have nowadays to pass a law that could, you know, broad the rights of Black people in Argentina. So in that sense, I do feel like we we should wait a little bit because sometimes you have to be strategic as well, where
Mm,
where to put your energy and your efforts. You know, right now maybe we can put our efforts on gaining, you know, international alliances, things like that. But
yeah.
maybe it's not the moment to ask or to push the government to do something that we know they have no interest in it.
And even, these policies you speak of, I know reparations, so actual, financial reparations for people of African descent has been something that has been talked about in other countries. Do you believe that um people of Afro-descendant citizens in Argentina should receive reparations at some point?
Of course, of course. You know, I feel like Black people in Argentina should have some kind of quota, for example. But also, I know a lot of families that have traced back um, to the ancestors that came here enslaved and they have the documents and they can prove it. So I feel like those people should have instant economic reparations. I also feel like one possible reparation would be that people, Afro-descendant people, should get their um, DNA tests for ancestry because there's still some kind of, doubt. So I feel like we should have the right to know where we come from. And I
Mhm.
feel like this should be a reparation for all Black people that are uh, descendants of enslaved people. We should know where we come from.
So you as standing today as a citizen of Argentina, you cannot. Is there any channel through which you can, uncover your ancestry or trace your ancestry back
No,
to Africa?
I should do it by myself. I can buy it and do it, but there's
Mm.
no like DNA bank from the state where you can go and get tested. In Cordoba, this province that had a big percentage of Black population, for sometimes they did have that policy, but it was for a short period of time.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to get into kind of a fun trivia part of our conversation as we, close off. Because we talked a lot about, the history of people of African descent in Argentina. And I want to just kind of play a game that really gives people who may be interested in visiting or maybe tourists kind of what they should look forward to. Name one Afro-Argentine historical figure more people should know about.
Okay, first one, Maria Remedios del Valle, Black woman that joined the army during the independence wars, and she became so important that she was then captain and then recognized as the mother of the country, of the nation. I think that's the main one that people should know. But then I also think it's very interesting to know like these first musicians of the tango scene, like Enrique Maciel, for example, that composed more than 200 songs. And yeah, I think that's also something that we should bring more light to it. I want to name Pocha La Madrid. She was a woman that um, created the first Afro-Argentine organization in the 90s, right? First, she was a dancer and a singer, right? And then in her older days, she became like a fierce activist of the Afro-Argentine movement. And one of the main things that she did is that this last census that we have was the first one that integrated the question, are you Afro-descendant? So it was the first one after colonial times that actually counted Black people in the country, right? And this was in 2021. But she had started um, to make her own census of Afro-Argentinians with the people she knew, and also just asking people on the street. So she started this with other activists as well, and this was the main thing that pushed the government and the statistic institute of the government to introduce the Afro-descendant option in the census. So La Pocha La Madrid was a great activist. I would say she created the Afro-Argentine political movement as we know it today. So I feel like even though I didn't get to meet her, she died in 2020. I do feel like she's in a way our grandma, the
Yeah.
grandma of
Yeah.
all the, young people and the new generations of the Afro-Argentine movement.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another one. What's one invention? I know you've talked about tango. We've talked about tango already,
Yeah.
right? As someone that's been inspired by that. But what's one invention, traditional, cultural practice, or contribution that most people don't realize was created or influenced by Black Argentines or Black Argentines?
Well, one of the main things that people do when they come to Argentina is eat steak, right? Our barbecue is very famous. But if you go to any restaurant here, you see that we not only eat steak, but other parts of the cow that were actually thrown away as garbage, and who picked them to eat and to sell were Black women, especially. And those are the parts that we call achuras, right? And I think that is also a similarity that Black communities have, because I know in the US that also happen with the chitlings, for example, things like that, in Brazil as well. I think that is very interesting. When people enjoy their steak, they know that that exists because Black women were there, catching that to survive, really.
Wow, wow. No, that's really interesting. That's a pretty interesting find for me. You're right. In the US, that's, chitterlings, which are basically the
Yeah.
intestines, of the animal, and even in parts of Africa. So my dad is, from Cameroon. I'm part Cameroonian, and even there, also the intestines are seen as a part that you can actually prepare and and eat. So that's really interesting that that influence transferred over to Argentina. Okay, so what's one town or neighborhood or place someone should visit to experience Argentina's richest Afro-descendant history?
I would say La Boca. La Boca is a neighborhood near the port in Buenos Aires. And La Boca is very touristic, but if you are a more courageous visitor, you can hear, for example, the groups of candombe that go out on Sundays playing the drums. Um, And I think is a very interesting neighborhood to see, you know, the Black heritage, but also the mixing of different cultures, because there was where the immigrants first arrived when they came to Argentina, and they were workers at the port.
And then we talked about the World Cup, you know, in
Yeah.
great detail and all kinds of conversations around race surrounding the World Cup.
Yeah.
What would you say to Black travelers who may or may not be hesitant to visit or even live in Argentina because of these stories they heard during the World Cup?
What I would say, I think be open to discover the great things about a country that is very, very diverse. If you come to Argentina, try to get out of Buenos Aires as well. The north of Argentina is a place that is not only beautiful with mountains and salt lakes, but also you see that Argentina is very indigenous, you know? Yeah, and be open to get to know the people and their
Mhm.
histories and how they lived their lives here in Argentina.
Yeah.
You come here and you may experience racism because this is a country as any other. But we have great things. I think we value, you know, collective action. As I was saying, we value friendship a lot. People are very warm, and there is a Black community. You know, if you're hearing this, you know there is a Black community, and this is the people you should, you know, look for in Argentina. Come to the Black Center parties that we are organizing the last years. Come to El Tambo. um, People, if you look for people that will be open to meet with you and show you the city. So yeah, if you want to come here and have a Black experience, you can, because there are
Yeah.
spaces, there are organizations, there are places to connect.
And then lastly, pretend we're in the year 2046. So 20 years from now, what do you hope will exist for Afro-Argentines that doesn't exist today?
My one of my dreams is to have an Afro-Argentine museum. I think there's so much history. There are amazing archives, people that have photos of the carnival parties. You know, there's so much history. There's so many figures that we want to showcase. There are so many ideas of expos, so many things that we could do. So that is one of my big dreams, to have a whole museum dedicated to Afro-Argentine history.
This has been great. I'm
Yes.
really glad that we got to talk, and I've learned so much more than I thought I would even learn.
That's good.
So I really appreciate that. So I thought I was coming here to shed light on the community, but I think it became a big learning experience for me. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. It was great talking to you. I was eager to talk about this topic, so thank you for the space.